United, oh, sorry, yikes, I'm going to have to cut that, to the Moms for America podcast. I work with a lot of groups. What can I say? Anyways, tonight I'm so excited to have my guest, Trevor Lee. Today's conversation is one that I've really been looking forward to because he's such a controversial character. People either love this representative or not so much. And I really want you guys to have a chance to hear his own words instead of just the kind of garbled what everybody is, regularly saying. So, yes, Corinne, yeah, Utah Parents United, shout out to them, but we are Utah Moms for America. And our focus is to raise the next generation of patriots, promote liberty, and most importantly, well, those are both really important, but the other one is to empower parents. And I feel like the biggest way that we can empower you is by letting you get to know who's representing you. So, Trevor, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks, Carrie.
So I just want to jump in and talk about some of these legislative bills. If you guys were on earlier, you're going to hear some of the same things because we had technical difficulties, but this will be the official. So yeah, the first bill I want to talk about is social and emotional learning and why that is such a controversy, why it was so hard to get it passed.
Well, the reason why it was so hard is because social emotional learning has evolved so much from basic life skill sets that our children should be taught by their parents that are now being taught in the schools to way beyond that in trying to push political ideology on a child, how to be a good stand-up citizen, but maybe not the way that we want, but that some potentially woke activists might like. And so the bill had morphed multiple times, and one of the things that it was really trying to get at the heart of was making sure we could ban character education and the grading of that. Because character education should be taught by the parents. Social emotional learning, if you want to teach it, should be taught by the parents. But now what they're trying to do is force it on our teachers to then force it on the kids because they are getting pressured that that is more important in a lot of cases than the basics like math, reading, science, and social studies or whatever you want to learn about in school. And those proficiencies have dropped as we have seen them implement more of the social emotional learning. And it's morphed now into a grading mechanism that they are going to use. So this last session, there was a bill passed that is going to grade students. 10% of the grade is going to be based on attendance, not on actual learning and studying and normal grades that we were all raised with that have now morphed into other things. Well, we're not far down the road from also having grades on your resilience, grades on how your leadership skills are, grades on how kind you are to people. Those kinds of things are wrong. They're not what the school should be teaching. We should let teachers focus on what they do best, which is to go through the basics and not have to be essentially a full-time parent as well in the classroom. So HB 399 was to ban the grading of character education and also to try to help get rid of a lot of the social emotional learning stuff that we didn't want in the schools as well.
I just want to hit some of those words because I know that parents who don't really understand are going to go, what's wrong with resilience? What's wrong with leadership? What's wrong with kindness? Right. And what tends to happen is we have an idea in our head of what those words mean. We have kind of that traditional dictionary version. And social and emotional learning is at its heart pushing a progressive agenda, pushing our children into being progressives. There's not really a neutral way to teach social and emotional learning. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, just first and foremost, it's just not the school's job nor role to be teaching that stuff. If that's where we want to get to the crux of the issue here. And these are things that parents should be teaching their kids, not the government.
And I know that one of the arguments is as well parents aren't, but I would argue that maybe 10%, probably more like 5% aren't invested in that, but so many are. And so many parents have different expectations than schools do for what character development is. So,
Yep.
It really does pits parents against teachers because they're saying, why are you doing this? And the other people are saying, because you aren't, and etc. And it doesn't build for a very strong and a trusting relationship between the two that always was there before.
Correct.
That's the way that I've seen it. So how about pushback from teachers? Do they want to teach social and emotional learning?
So I'm going to compare it to technology in schools. I don't think teachers initially wanted this, but uh, because they're so used to it now and it's so ingrained in the classrooms, they're going to assume that they cannot teach or help kids without it. In fact, I did hear from a lot of teachers that, well, I can help a kid learn math better if I'm teaching him how to be a better person or be kind to his fellow students. And they truly believe that. And so it's so immersed now that a lot of teachers believe that it's part of their responsibility and role to help kids with this, and not theirs anymore, not the parents' role.
Um, that's frustrating because you only have, ideally you have bell to bell an hour to teach, or really 50 minutes because of 10 minutes to get to your next class or to switch over, right? Which is not a lot of time for teaching kids to be academically adept, really. And to instead infuse lessons that should be 2 + 2 = 4 into the brown kids have this and the kind of thing, which is oftentimes what's in this. It's generative conversations, and it's emotional. The emotion is that you're supposed to feel a particular way, right? So I think another really good example is kindness. Nobody wants their kid to not be kind, but how are we defining kindness?
Correct. And more importantly is, if your kid's not kind, then what? What do you do? And who are they to say what is kind, right?
Right.
If the child says something like, I only want a mom and a dad. I don't want, two dads or two moms. Like, is that kid unkind because he was taught in his home to have traditional families? And that's the problem, is they've blurred the lines on what that is. And the kids shouldn't have to be dealing with that. They shouldn't have to be told that kind of stuff, and they shouldn't be graded, and they shouldn't have expectations with that. They just shouldn't have to deal with it in general. So
To me, honestly, it seems fundamentally un-American to not allow a family to have free choice, to not allow a child to have free choice. That seems like a problem. And I know I want to go into that place we talked about a little bit. I know that because of your viewpoint, you have gotten some pretty strong attacks. People have called you racist and white supremacist, etc. How do you deal with that, especially as a young person? Because I think you're one of the youngest members, right?
mhm.
How do you deal with
Yeah.
it?
Well, it's interesting. We live in a different world now of politics. Specifically, we talk about like the transformation of the Republican Party. Uh, Bad policies and putting, for example, Americans last is what got us Barack Obama, which is then what got us Donald Trump. And this idea of populism means you're doing what the will of the people want, and that's things that are good for America, good for its families, putting us first. And anyone who pushes back against that, whether you push back against Republicans who are still old school in that way, or all the Democrats, they can't refute that. Oh, like, it's important that I put my country first. So they just call you racist, they call you homophobic, they call you bigoted. And so it's almost like one of those just go-to things that you're used to hearing if you're going to stand up for what's right in the year 2026. And yeah, maybe it pulled some weight back in 2020, but not anymore. And people are sick of it. It doesn't really do anything at this point anymore. And for a lot of those who are in the middle, common sense people who maybe not have any type of interest or involved in politics, when they hear that kind of rhetoric from the left, when they hear that kind of rhetoric from maybe an old, Bush Republican or Romney Republican, they're going to agree with the populist side. I mean, Trump is the most popular Republican president we've had since Ronald Reagan. And the reason for that is he's doing what the people want. And they've called him every name under the sun. And in Utah, it's been no different for me. I just speak the things that I know that are true. I stand up for my constituents, for my family. I stand up for every person who agrees with the policies that I push. And more importantly, I'm even standing up for all the Utahns and citizens who don't even realize that I'm standing up for them too. And for those who don't have good arguments or policy against it, they just can name call. And that's just to what it just means they're losing the crux of the argument at this point.
That's a very mature way to put up with it. As a girl, I get way too emotional about, like, don't be, the whole thing. It's kind of crazy to me that Utah wants to be known so much as being the kindness state, the nice state, when there is this vitriol underneath it when you don't follow in lockstep. So again, you're quite young. What got you involved in politics?
Yeah, what really got me involved was COVID. I was fed up with the mask mandates, the vaccine mandates, the one-way directions down shopping aisles in stores, the government picking winners and losers, forcing friends and families' livelihoods down the drain because they weren't essential. I mean, it was just a scary time in the history of the world and specifically in America. And it's not the America that I grew up in. I've always been involved politically just on knowing what the major issues were. But I decided in 2020, after it was getting better, it's actually 2022 by then, that if not me, then who else? And so I decided to run at the time, was 30 years old, and wanted to make a difference. And it's changing so rapidly, the world that we live in this day and age. And I want a good life for my kids. I want the good things that I can still recognize in Utah and America for them to have it. And I want to stop the things that are turning us into California. And if we're not careful, we will turn into a state that does not share the morals and values of the majority of Utahns still. It's just a matter of waking people up, and I definitely been woken up and was decided to make a difference about it. So that's why I ran for office.
How do you go about waking people up? Yesterday was caucus. We didn't have amazing turnouts across the state. I know it's not a presidential year. There's a lot of people who want to see caucus gone. They'd like to see jungle primaries, etc. How do you instill in this younger generation? I teach high schoolers, and how do you instill in them a passion to care?
Well, it's kind of like the old saying of like once you grow up, you become a Republican type thing. And the reason for that and why we always joke about it is because when it affects you or you feel like you have some skin in the game, you're much more likely to be involved. And that tends to be always what gets people involved in politics. At some point, they had something that was an issue to them that they needed solved or that was affecting their lives, and so they decided that they needed to go out there and get involved because it could affect their livelihood or it could affect their health or some of their children or education or whatever it is. So it's always, I think, about finding that issue that's important to those people. So let me give you an example. In my area, my opponent right now, he voted to raise our property taxes by 15%. Well, you don't have to be political to disagree with that and think that that is going to hurt your family. Hey, struggling to make ends meet. We're already, our tax burden as a state is one of the highest in the country for a red state as it is. The cost of living is through the roof, housing's unaffordable. But then to add 15% on a property tax, it really affects people and it hurts them. And so, it's our job to explain that to those out within, like my district, that is something that affects them, that was a bad decision, it was a mismanagement of funding and of the funds of the county. And that's something that we need to make sure that they're aware of. And if they are, they're much more likely to get involved because they don't want that same person to stay in office to continually mismanage the funds and have to raise them because they don't know how to cut spending. And that is an example of getting people involved because it affects them. Uh, so that's a broad example, but sometimes it's got to be an extreme number before people do decide, oh, I got to get involved. But by that point, sometimes it can be too late. I mean, look
Right.
at any communist country. Usually, it was always just a little, 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 and then before they know it, it's like, oh, you got people in chains and they're shipping them off. Um, this is No different in America, and typically that's why turnout is low. Also in Utah, I would say that caucus, and you know this, Carrie, but caucus had a bad turnout and has for a while because there is a system to subvert the caucus system with SB
Right.
54. Why would people go to caucus if you put all the time and effort into vet the candidates just to have someone subvert you and get on the ballot directly? I mean, that for me is the telltale sign of why people aren't going to caucus like they used to, because it really, in the end, for a lot of races, it doesn't matter, and so they don't want to put their time and effort into it. I mean, as you know, it's already hard enough to get people just to understand who they're voting for, yet
Right.
alone try to show up to caucus night and become a delegate. But I do applaud every one of those individuals who do that, because those are the people who are showing up to try to make a difference, without necessarily being an elected official, but they're getting involved at the most grassroots level to get intimate with the candidates and understand the issues. And I'll put up a delegate any day of the week over someone who's not a delegate on just knowledge based issues and who they know that is in government. And I wish everyone had that opportunity. That's how I got started. When I was 18, I became a delegate, and the first person I ever cast a vote for was Senator Mike Lee. And so I watched that happen at an early age, that getting involved, you could make a difference. And I wish SB 54 wasn't around, because you'd have more stories like that I had to watch. Well, wow, I just took out almost a 20-year plus incumbent in the Senate of the United States, and my vote mattered. Well, we need
Right.
to get back to those days. We need to get back to where people, if they get involved, they know it's going to mean something and make a difference.
Well, so Yuri Bezmenov, the Russian defector, he was talking, or he talks about demoralization. And I do think that SB 54 demoralizes people. We just found out a few hours ago that the petition repeal is probably not going to pass, because these people who they quite frankly raid, and I use the term colonize, because they take another level. Like we already lose to people who collect those, who collect signatures, but then on top of that, we also have, when they don't like something that's passed, they can have an initiative, and oftentimes you have to recognize that the people, these organizations that put forth the initiatives, organizations like Mormon Women for Ethical Government, Better Boundaries, etc., um, they're in academia, so they can stand with a sign and say, "Hey, everybody, sign my petition," and they can fill those petitions much faster than the grassroots person. But there still has to be, like, I was at my caucus last night. I'm a delegate again, and there still has to be hope for them. There were a lot of young people, a lot of young Republicans who showed up. Not enough, but how do we get them to keep going, and what hope do we have in removing? Is there a path to ever removing SB 54, do you think?
I mean, it would be tough, but you definitely need some overturn to make it happen. I believe at least the House right now would have the votes to repeal an SB 54, but I don't think the Senate has the votes.
Right.
And there's not a lot of overturn in that body. So I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but I would definitely tell everyone to keep going to caucus, because those who want to get rid of it completely are going to use that as the reason and means to say you're gone forever.
Right.
But and there are still some races where it matters. Not everyone gets signatures, and so for those ones, I mean, that's a really, really important thing. The other one is special elections. I mean, that's the only way
Yeah.
we've had some really good senators get in, and even House members, is through the special elections that the delegates get a vote on. Those
Yeah.
are a big deal. And so I would tell everyone, like, keep going, because there still is a purpose for it. We may not be happy with all the outcomes because of SB 54, but we need to continue to keep the caucus strong so that we don't ever lose it completely, and then we lose every chance to get away from just getting signatures and getting on the ballot.
What keeps you humble? There are One of the things that I find really frustrating is that um there's a lot of elitism in Utah, in my opinion. So there's a lot of elitism, especially at the Capitol, but without, in my opinion, the legs underneath it. So you'll come and you'll say, "Hey, this social and emotional learning, let's take that. That's a Trojan horse, right?" and people will say, oh, you're just crazy. But yet
Mhm.
you're willing to listen to people. And I noticed that another place, because you're the person who, and from what I'm, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you're the only person who is willing to say, hey, can we put our citizens, our struggling citizens, above illegal immigrants?
Yeah, there's been a phrase coined by Gad, who's on X and is a famous author. It's called
Mhm.
suicidal empathy, and I think that defines more of where Utahns are at, maybe potentially more so than the elitism side.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is, you would have situations where someone would be willing to go take a homeless man, put them in their home because they're being kind, and they wake up the next day and the homeless man had raped their daughter and left. And not understanding and realizing that they would put their own family in danger at the expense of taking that homeless guy off the street. And that's a real life scenario. That the thing has happened before, but you have to put that into perspective with policies. And I think it's okay to admit that we've had policies in the past that were wrong, that didn't work, and the consequences of those we've been seeing those everywhere now. In fact, I would beg the question to anyone who thinks, give me a metric that Utah is better at now than it was before, for example, the Utah Compact or the Compromise. Like, give me anything that
Can you
we have done
explain that?
better at, or we're moving in a positive direction
What
since
is
those were.
that? What are those?
So there was the compact that was signed, which was an agreement of how we were going to handle non-citizens in the state of Utah, and that was designed to essentially give driver's license to illegals. We were going to also offer some type of benefits as well, and just kind of essentially turn a blind eye. Like, we got rid of E-Verify essentially, and just said, look, if people are going to be here, we're going to be kind and compassionate to them. They're already here, so let's just almost essentially not make them feel like they're not someone who's not a citizen. And that has proven to be very detrimental. We've had some serious issues as pertains to housing. That's a big one. We also have become a hotspot and a destination, specifically when the Biden administration left the border wide open. So our state was flooded with illegal immigrants in that time period, and the issue with that is, we were the hotspot for a lot of it. And who is affected? Our schools. The schools get slammed with a bunch of kids who can't speak English. The crime does go up. Our medical rooms are having, or emergency rooms are having extremely long wait times, which we all have to pay for that. You're going to have issues with depressed wages across the entire state. So you're going to have to be competing with those who are willing to work underneath the table and don't have to pay taxes. Which, by the way, I have a personal experience with that. When I was younger, my dad lost his job. We picked up cleaning office buildings to make ends meet on the weekends. And after about a year of that, it was a Hispanic company that was willing to work for a lot less than we could even comprehend, and took that ability away from us to keep working and have that job. So I've seen it firsthand, and that was 15 plus years ago. It's even worse today in a lot of cases. Any type of framers, a lot of the sheetrock guys, any of these industries and businesses that if you are not an illegal, in a lot of cases, you're not going to get the job, and you can't outbid these guys. Um, and so it's not, and I don't buy the argument that people won't do the work. Like, if we need
Right.
labor, we have taken all those jobs away from who used to do them, which was a lot of our kids and those who are maybe going through college and other spheres where, you know, someone could just make a good living doing it in general. And we've enriched supervisors and owners of businesses at the expense of everyone else within our state. And so that's where I'm definitely against the illegal immigration side and all of the consequences that we receive from being, quote unquote, nice to them. Um, I mean, look at the drug issues that we have now in our state. We have a huge homeless problem. I mean, like I said, almost in every metric possible, we're worse off than we were before, and we could have prevented a lot of that in a lot of cases. In fact, in the state legislature every year, appropriations and something. Domestic violence victims, the
Right.
disability wait list, the schools are always asking for money, and yet we're giving out close to over $1 billion a year to non-citizens in the state of Utah. I mean, it's insane the amounts of money that are being given to those who came here legally, and then we reward that with not only a driver's privilege card, but also with the ability to receive benefits that Utah families that are struggling to make ends meet are not getting them now. That's wrong. Government does not have unlimited amounts of funding. Heck, we're $39 trillion in debt as a country. Uh, as a state, we're fiscally responsible, but because we spend so much money, we have outpaced growth with our budget significantly. The cost of living is so expensive now. We don't have the means to take care of everyone in the world. And that is essentially what we have said and done. And I think that's wrong. I think that we need to prioritize citizens. And it seems to be a really hard pill to swallow for many of my colleagues in the House and specifically the Senate. Not that there are some that don't want that. In fact, we passed the House with the bill that I had, um, but there's still a lot who said, "Yeah, I just don't think this is compassionate to take a benefit away from someone who's a non-citizen." And look, that's okay, but they really need to explain that then to the people who vote them into office, that they are prioritizing someone with taxpayer money over the needs of their own people. And I just wish it wasn't so, but it might take, a few years to get something like that passed in our state.
So there's a few things that I think about that. One, I don't know if we're the same way, but I know that in Minnesota, when they brought in so many illegals, they targeted the low income areas that were already in need of resources and help. And that's where they put them all. They plonked them there. And then those people, and it's kind of funny to me, and I know the word's taboo, replacement, but when one base becomes your new group of dependency, then I think that becomes a problem. And I do think that it is dependency. Now, a lot of people will say these people do not get like welfare benefits. No, or I don't know if that's true or not, but I do know that there are NGOs that provide all the same kind of services, and we're paying for
Correct.
the NGOs.
Correct. They receive taxpayer money, and we've completely infused it. And this is one of the issues I have with the bill. And we had talked about and debated it in committee and on the floor a little bit, but we have private-public partnerships that have completely fused with
Mhm.
all the government funding and have made it so and said so that it would be almost impossible to separate the funds now, to not know what the charitable funds are versus the taxpayer funds. And they really should be separate buckets because
Right,
taxpayer money is not the same as charitable money. And the more and more we infuse those two, and the more and more we put the omen on government to take care of these people, just even American citizens in general, the more we diminish the role of charities and how important they are. And we also diminish the role of wanting to give to charities because why would you? You're like, oh, well, the government just takes it and they take care of that.
right,
The problem is you're forced to give it to the government. If I don't pay my taxes, I go to prison. But you don't have to pay to a charity. And at least with that, you could pick and choose where your money was going.
right,
And government has just gotten so big and it has gotten its hands into so many different buckets that it is paying and funding so many things that the majority of Utahns and citizens probably would say, I don't agree with that. But you're
right.
stuck and forced to pay for it. And that's wrong. And we need to stop the bleeding. We have to separate that if we can. We have to start putting guardrails up because it creates resentment and those who are here legally. It makes people angry with their government. It creates distrust in their government, and in the end, it's not a good thing to have that in our society. It will be the downfall of us eventually if we're not careful. And we look at states who do this and take it to a whole nother level, like California, how much of a disaster it's been for them and their economy.
Right.
I mean, it's an unrecognizable state now in many cases because they have gone down the path that we have, been slightly trudging on. And I would argue the only thing that has kept us propped up and out of the mess to be exactly like California is just our good heritage roots that we have in our state. We're a very charitable state, we're a very giving state, we're a hardworking state. Luckily, our Constitution forces us to balance our budget, but those things will go away and they will be diminished if we keep doing bad policy that's going to turn us into a state like California. Inevitably, we will become what we didn't want to be. And that is why we need to work so hard to start reeling these programs back and fighting for Utahns.
Well, when Charlie Kirk was killed, there were people who were standing up on the top and around different areas, and they had signs that said, "I was here when Utah turned blue." How close do you think we are to that point?
Um, I mean, heck, we have a whole donut hole right now that's going to be a Democrat stronghold in Salt Lake, and it'll just grow. And what's scary about this is Colorado is the blueprint for how you turn a red state blue very quickly. And
Yes.
in fact, there's even a book on it. It's called The Blueprint, and it's fascinating to read if anyone wants to go see how they did it. But what essentially happened is, in the name of democracy initiatives and referendums, they've come in and they're able to create laws. And all you had to do was have a couple of radical judges, activist judges, side with these initiatives or referendums, and then there's nothing you can do. They become the law. And what they did was they slowly started using money to run their own laws in the state, and the people not being informed and not understanding what it was doing or what the consequences of those decisions were voted for the demise of their state.
Right.
And Utah is going to be no different. In fact, if we can't repeal Prop 4, that's a scary place to be, because then what could we not repeal, or what could we even vote for that was either good or bad? And that just shows you where the people are at, and it just starts with one donut hole. You can't get rid of it, and then it just grows and it spreads, and before you know it, you have two or three blue districts, and then by the end of it, you're a completely blue state.
Right.
And I would say that as we continue to go away from our roots, our pioneer heritage in the state of Utah, um, that good drive that we had is going to be gone, and we will flip blue very quickly. And I could see it happening within maybe 10 to 15 years.
You're
And
generous. You're generous.
well,
I think that we will. I think that we will be significantly more blue at midterms. That's what I see from watching certain groups, and maybe you're not having spies in certain groups who are following
yeah,
what their plan is, and it absolutely Colorado is targeting Utah. So the same people, the same, especially the group called Indivisible,
hmm
and they're very much targeting. And we definitely have groups that are, it's really hard that they're the people who brought forth these initiatives, and they're the ones who said, whenever we don't like what the legislators tell me if I get this wrong, because I'm not a big political head person, but if you so what essentially what they did is said, if we don't like what the legislators do, we can have an initiative about it at any point. Okay. And like I said, they're standing there waiting. They're easily, when there were old people being attacked trying to repeal Prop 4. Like old people just standing at grocery stores and being yelled at, and people would stand there with signs and stand in front of them. And this is stuff I saw in Washington State. So to see it in Utah just in the last few months has been alarming. And then I think there's also I was talking to somebody, or I put a post up, and somebody said the issue is that there's so many ways to define a Republican. So when we say we're a Republican state, well, we have all sorts of, we've got MAGA, we've got never Trumpers, we've got progressives, we've got all within the Republican Party. But I don't know that I would call them Republicans, or at least I wouldn't call them conservatives. That's what I call myself, as a conservative.
well, what we're supposed to do is, yeah, we have our differences like within the Republican Party, but push comes to shove, there are certain things we should really all unite around,
Right.
and we're just not. In fact, we're seeing a lot of Republicans side with Democrats on the major issues. And that's going to hurt us too, right? If we can't stand strong together, like what good is being a super majority Republican state? Uh, and in fact, even like in the House, we say that, and we know that, like, if we're united, we're so much stronger. We
Right.
can push back on things. We can message things better. We can pass good legislation. But when you start having cracks in that, and some issues, yeah, it gets really hard. It really gets really hard to get things done. For me, I guess, being younger, one of the issues that I see is I, I've seen just in my short life how quickly things are changing, and I understand. At least I would feel I'm humble enough to see and admit that when we've done something over and over and over again and it's not working, or we've tried something multiple times before and it didn't work out, that maybe we should do something different. And sometimes I think that that kind of change is hard for Republicans, and we do seem to have a lot of that in Utah. A lot of the old school Republicans still who are just hanging on, just hoping and assuming that it's the old days of Bush Cheney Republican is still alive, and there's still an ability to work with Democrats on issues. Like it's just not that world anymore. We don't have that. I mean, the left has become so unhinged. They'll kill us. They really will. I mean, you talk about, going out and just trying to gather signatures, getting harassed in public. Like those are the kinds of people that we're up against now. And it's here in Utah. It's not like it used to be where you could, feel free to go out and have a difference of opinions and be okay and disagree, but you can't do that anymore. And so
Right.
to admit that it's changed and it's done means we have to adapt. And if we don't as a party, as a legislature, like we're going to get creamed on these issues and it's over.
Yeah, I oftentimes say that they're not the Kennedy Democrats anymore. That's not what we're dealing with. So, because it used to be, and here's the thing, while we were taught to never talk about politics and religion, the left was talking about politics and religion. They were infiltrating our schools with politics and a new religion. That new religion is queer theory. And so I wanted to talk to you about two things. One, I'm going to push back a little bit because I didn't really understand. I have, I admire very much that you wanted to name a street after Charlie Kirk. Okay, I will say I've never seen so much vitriol as after his death. The like just utter racist things that people would send me, and then they would say Charlie Kirk thinks that about you. And I'm just like, well, here's the thing. So Charlie's in your age category and he reaches people like my son's age, right? So I didn't listen to a lot of Charlie Kirk. But after people started saying all this stuff about him, I was curious and I went down the rabbit hole and listened, and I don't disagree with what he said. I don't think he was a racist. Like that is so easy to call someone, right? And the same thing with his version of empathy. Now, when I use empathy, I don't use suicidal empathy. I see tactical empathy. I see people who use other people's empathy against them. So you've got the suicidal empathy, they're the people who fall for it, otherwise maybe known as the dupes, maybe the people, and I don't mean dupes in a disparaging way, but I know one thing is that you guys get a lot of emails, right? And some of those emails are not
Yes.
very friendly, right? And so I think that people use them in two ways. Um they can be threatening, but they can also really tap into emotions, and that becomes tactical empathy. I'm going to say the thing that's going to make them feel like they're a bad person if they don't do what I tell them to do. Meanwhile, a lot of times these are people who don't give a damn about their their constituents. And I do think that is, I know that is a situation with some of our senators. Not all of them, but some of them, they don't. They, like we are nothing. Our pains, our struggles, they're nothing. And it's very hard to come to them and to say, "Hey, I just want to point out as politely as possible, I just want to point out that what you're doing is wrong." Take for example, graphic books, graphic books that have to do with things like snuff, okay? And they won't even listen. But you do, and you listen to people who aren't even in your district. So that's how we get back to the hope and having it feel like it's approachable to people, because these things are like, you just feel like there's nothing I can do about this.
Yeah. Well, and I can't change how, my colleagues interact with the general public. Uh, I do my best to be accessible and listen to everyone, even all the loonies who call me. I take the vast majority of those calls. Um, I'll take the emails and, uh, yeah, it just, I think I think transparency is a big deal. If you're going to be in office, you need to, um, let people know where you stand. I'm an open book with that. I take a lot of crap because I am willing to stand up for what I believe in, even if I know that a lot of people on the left are going to hate it, and even some people on the right. So, um, I
Why
wish.
remove sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, no, you're fine.
Why have the Charlie Kirk sign remove the Harvey Milk sign?
Yeah, a couple of the reasons. So, number one, Harvey Milk was a known pedophile. He was a bad person. He has no ties to Utah whatsoever. Second thing, Charlie Kirk was, in my opinion, the definition of civil dialogue, of trying to understand each other and respectfully debate the issues, which I think is a completely absent thing from Salt Lake City. So what better than to replace the name of a pedophile with a man who can remind them every single day to have civil dialogue with someone you disagree with in the heart of Salt Lake City?
Wow. See, I honestly thought that it was an epic troll. So I like your answer a lot better. But that's what I thought when you were doing it. I was like, why? This one I'm having a hard time understanding. But and I can understand that too, having been there. It was a horrific, there's rage, there's other things that
Mhm.
go with that. Okay, so the flags, you were the person who had the flags removed, and then they turned around and put up stickers in their place. Or, you know, um, why? What is your issue with these flags?
So my issue necessarily wasn't with flags; it was with division. We shouldn't be having a flag for every single person, individual, specifically on government property, where the government, once again, this goes back to the whole issue of like charities government, where you give your money and what it supports. Well, the government shouldn't be pushing one side over another, specifically if it's political. And so the idea behind the bill was, let's get back to an American and a state flag. And obviously a list of some exceptions for certain cases in schools and things of that sort. But the government shouldn't ever be actively trying to promote an ideology or an agenda. And it's very divisive, and it's become that way. Specifically, you have to go after the LGBTQ flag because it's one that is used and is the one that many in government have used as the symbol to promote their agenda, um, specifically to those who don't agree with it nor want it. Um, and so, being the biggest, infraction of the issue, um, that seemed to be the one that was targeted the most. But in reality, those people should just be flying a state flag or American flag on their buildings. The government entities, and specifically in a classroom, classrooms where kids are should not be showing or feeling like the school that they choose is supporting one agenda or over another. We hear all the time from the left that they're trying to continually push separation of church and state. We hear it all the time, right? There would be some serious issues if we had crosses put up all over within the public school system. Like, they wouldn't allow it. They would make us take them down. But for some reason, it's been okay to have an LGBTQ flag in schools. Like, one's a religion of them too, essentially. And so I would just say that if all that's gone, like, and we on the right have been good about our separation and following the rules, kind of like you said earlier, the left has just always gone in there and done whatever they've wanted. And now it's time to put us on an equal playing field where we all can only fly these flags on these governmental properties.
Well, the crazy thing to me is that the American flag has always said "injustice for all." Now, if you don't feel that, doesn't change the fact that that's what it says, injustice for all. So we have that, and then we have a bunch of people who want a particular centered around the marginalized viewpoint, which really does send a very strong message to certain people. Your ideas are not welcome here. And oftentimes, your religious values are not welcome here. When I've had these discussions with educators, a lot of times they're like, well, I don't just teach Christians. Okay, well, we also have a lot of Muslims. They also would feel the same way about this flag. Now, I do have a question, and I'd reached out to you before, and you said there's nothing that can be done about it. But I have this concern, and some of my friends who are Latin, including asylum seekers, have this concern. Inside our schools, not just are the flags, but they're the clubs. And a lot of these clubs are just like the NGOs, teaching the kids to be activist, teaching them to hate this country from the second they get here. Why can nothing be done about that when it's like it's in their curriculum, it's on their Instagram pages? And I'm saying this as somebody who, I have a friend who went and sat in one of these action clubs, and they were like, this is activism. It's teaching my kids to hate this country. Why can
So
nothing be done?
there
Go
was
ahead.
a bill this last session to address clubs up in elementary school. I don't know if you followed along with it.
Okay. No, I didn't even see
Um,
this.
like it was essentially not allowing a club if it favored one group over another more, and that just schools just weren't the place for those clubs in elementaries. I can't remember if that bill ended up passing the Senate or not, but it was a really good bill, and it was a good start, especially at
Okay.
the young ages. The kids, when you're in sixth grade or less, like, and you have an activist club, it's not you, it's an adult doing that. There's an adult pushing that,
Right.
and it's very clear. In fact, I think it was Kevin Stratton who had the bill,
Okay.
um, but that was a good start with it because there are certain clubs that we do want, right? Like if someone has a good, like a Republican club, we think that's fine as Republicans. Uh, and so I think it's just trying to put some guardrails around it for the most vulnerable, the youngest, the kids who really shouldn't be having these kinds of
Like
clubs.
rainbow clubs. That's what a GSEA is for children. Is
Yeah.
it would be the rainbow club. I
Hmm.
just think, I mean, I would agree with you. The division, that's the thing that whenever I see somebody call you a racist, I always feel like I need to jump in on the conversation and be like, no, he's not, because you're not about division. And I will say that in my experience, the most bigoted people that I ever run into are leftists who think that every person of color or every person who's questioning their gender, whatever, their sexuality, that they have to be put in a box. And I very much appreciate that that has never been you. Like, I don't think you've ever, I mean, there are people who size you up. They look at your shoes, they look at the way that you're dressed, and they decide whether or not you're worthy of talking to. You've never been that person. And I think that's something, in Moms for America, we have a differentiation. Sorry, it's getting late. Um, of a politician versus a statesman. A politician tends to serve themselves. A statesman tends to be involved to make things better. And I really do think that you are one of the few statesmen that we have. So you know, I don't have a problem showing my hand. So I'm like, that's where I fall on these things. I just want to see if there's anything else in terms of I see the flag display, um, gender identity legislation, sex designation. What did you do there? This is HB 183.
Yeah. So that was a very, very important bill. Uh, it started off and it ended up being the same bill that I started with, but along the way I was adding a bunch of pieces to it and then ended up taking all these pieces away. But the gist of the bill and the crux of it was, as we have gone through our state code and passed policy of the last 5 years, we run some significant legislation around like the trans issue.
Mhm.
What is a woman? what, we have to define these words. We have to define what sex is. And the unfortunate reality is it has creeped over and over into our code, the word gender, over the last 10 years.
Mhm.
And gender is not actually a real word that we should be using in our state code. The word should only be sex, male and female. That's it. The minute you allow and give credibility to anything outside of that is when our state opened up the window for gender fluidity and multiple genders and changing your birth certificate and allowing biological men and female spaces, because we weren't clearly defining in our code what those words meant and what they were. And Iowa passed a bill last year that was just this. They went through their entire code and they got rid of the word gender everywhere and just put sex, male and female. And that's what this bill did. Unfortunately, it did not pass the Senate. They killed it, which was unfortunate for our state and for our kids, because these words matter and they're very important. And I feel like I got that bill to a good place where I was still protecting people from being discriminated, but making sure that we defined in our code what these words meant. And yeah, that one was probably a little frustrating. It did pass because for those on the left, they knew what it meant and did, so they hated it. But on the right, many didn't see the value of that, which
Yeah.
is sad. But that is a very important bill, and it's something that we should do with our state code, is make sure our words matter and they mean something. For example, you can't have gender transitioning. It's an attempted sex change, and it's always an attempt because you can't
Right.
really change your sex.
Right.
That's what the code was going to say. And it would have aligned really well with, once again, all of our past legislation we've been doing, at least since I've been in office. And really would have hoped that bill would have passed. So something, if I get reelected, I want to run again.
That's so what can we do to help? How can the everyday citizen be more involved, and what can they do? I know a lot of times I'll hear we just don't have the votes. We just don't have the support. What should we be doing to help?
Well, there's two things. The first one is, when people come up for election, at least have a good understanding of where they stand on these issues, right? Ask them where they stand on school choice. Ask them where they stand on the family structure. Ask them where they stand on benefits for legal immigrants. Ask them these kinds of questions, because that's the time to hold people accountable, is in their election, right? So that's step one. The second one is, when we run these bills, man, it is so hard to see involvement in elections, but it's even harder to get people to come up to the Capitol and speak in favor or against bills. That makes a lot of difference with their opinions that they have, and if they're seeing, the public go one way or another on something. And I would say this is probably a third one, but it kind of goes into the second point, which is, if you can't show up at the Capitol, at least email, text, or call your legislator and tell them the things that you want them to support. If you hear about a bill, like let's say my HB 183 that I was running, the sex designation, and you support that, I really would have hoped that people would have called their legislator and said, look, so I vote for you, I support you, I really want you to pass this bill. When enough people do that, it can sway their opinion or make them really think about their constituency who elects them. And you would hope that they would listen. I know that's what the frustrating part was on the illegal immigration bills, is they were just slammed with texts and emails to support the bills, which in the end, they didn't. But you got to keep that up. Sometimes tough bills take time. School choice took 3 years in the state of Utah to pass.
Yeah.
So, it doesn't mean we stop. We keep going, and you build public momentum and support behind it by doing those two things, accountability in elections, and showing up with either the committee with a text, email, or actually yourself in person to testify in favor or against bad bills.
Thank you. One thing that if you've got bills coming up, should you be reelected, which we're all hoping that's the case. Should you be reelected, please let us know. Like, just do us the favor of sending out and saying, hey, I need support. And because we really are in this baby step place where we're all trying to figure out, and sometimes we're freaking out because we're like, how is this common sense thing not passing? And instead of using that energy to go, all right, how can I be effective? People get online and they just say whatever and do whatever, when we want to be as effective as possible, because we do need to be an informed citizenry, right?
Right.
So, Trevor, I really appreciate you having this conversation with me. Thank you so much. And so you're running, so you've got a campaign page up and everything
Yeah,
currently.
it's really simple. So it's votetrevorlee.com. And Trevor is Trevor, and Lee is just like the great Senator Mike Lee, Lee. So votetrevorlee.com. Any donations greatly appreciated. That can help go a long way. My opponent's heavily funded. He's a real estate developer, which we don't need more of those in our state. But you can also get a hold of me that way as well. Like I said, I'm very accessible, and if anyone wants to come help with the campaign, I can have jobs for you to do. So that would be great.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Have a
Thank
great
you so
night.
much, Carrie.